Hello everyone, I'm Katie Contos and welcome to today's webinar, which is hosted by the Clean Energy Solutions Center in partnership with Enerdata. Today's webinar is focused on the climate action in Asian and Pacific countries, the implications of NDCs and the role of carbon pricing for the energy sector. Before we begin, I'll quickly go over some of the webinar features. For audio, you have two options. You may either listen through your computer or over the telephone. If you choose to listen through your computer, please select the mic and speakers option in the audio pane. Doing so will eliminate the possibility of feedback and echo. If you choose to dial in by phone, please select the telephone option, and a box on the right side will display the telephone number and audio pin you should use to dial in. If anyone is having any technical difficulties with this webinar, you may contact the GoTo's Webinar Help Desk at 888-259-3826 for assistance. If you'd like to ask a question, we ask that you use the questions pane where you may type it in. The audio recording and presentation will be posted to the Solutions Center training page within a few days of the broadcast and will be added to the Solutions Center YouTube channel, where you'll find other informative webinars as well as video interviews with thought leaders on clean energy policy topics. Finally, one important note of mention before we begin our presentation is that the Clean Energy Solutions Center does not endorse or recommend specific products or services. Information provided in this webinar is featured in the Solutions Center Resource Library as one of many best practice resources reviewed and selected by technical experts. Today's webinar agenda is centered around the presentation from our guest speaker, Sorel Casisa, who has joined us to discuss climate action in Asian Pacific countries, the implications of NDCs, and the roles of carbon pricing for energy sector. Before we jump into the presentation, I'll provide a quick overview of the Clean Energy Solutions Center. Then following Sorel's presentation, we'll have a question and answer session where he will answer questions submitted by the audience. At the end of the webinar, you'll be automatically prompted to fill out a brief survey as well. So thank you in advance for taking a moment to respond. The Solutions Center was launched in 2011 under the Clean Energy Ministerial. The Clean Energy Ministerial is a high-level global forum to promote policies and programs that advance clean energy technologies, to share lessons learned and best practices, and to encourage the transition to a global clean energy economy. 24 countries in the European Commission are members, covering 90% of the clean energy investment and 75% of global greenhouse gas emissions. This webinar is provided by the Clean Energy Solutions Center, which focuses on helping government policymakers design and adopt policies and programs that support the deployment of clean energy technologies. This is accomplished through support in crafting and implementing policies related to clean energy access, no-cost expert policy assistance, and peer-to-peer learning and training tools, such as this webinar. The Clean Energy Solutions Center is co-sponsored by the governments of Australia, Sweden, and the United States, with in-kind support for the governments of Chile. The Solutions Center provides several clean energy policy programs and services, including a team of over 60 global experts that provide remote and in-person technical assistance to governments and government-supported institutions, no-cost virtual webinar trainings on a variety of clean energy policy topics, partnership building with development agencies and regional and global organizations to deliver support, and an online library containing over 5,500 clean energy policy-related publications, tools, videos, and other resources. Our primary audience is made up of energy policymakers and analysts from governments and technical organizations in all countries, but we also strive to engage with private sectors, NGOs, and civil society. The Solutions Center is an international initiative that works with more than 35 international partners across a suite of different programs. Several of the partners are listed above, include research organizations like IRENA and IEA, and programs like SE for All, and regional focus entities such as ECOWAT, Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. A marquee feature of the Solutions Center provides is a no-cost expert policy assistance known as Ask an Expert. The Ask an Expert service matches policymakers with more than 60 global experts selected as authoritative leader on specific clean energy finance and policy topics. For example, in the area of renewable energy, we are very pleased to have our guest speaker, Sorel Casisa, serving as one of our experts. If you have a need for our policy assistance in renewable energy or any other clean energy sector, we encourage you to use this valuable service. Again, this assistance is provided free of charge. If you have a question for one of our experts, please submit it through our online simple form at cleanenergysolutions.org/expert. We also invite you to spread this word about the service to those in your networks and organizations. Now I'd like to provide a brief introduction for today's speaker. Our expert today is Dr. Sorel Casisa, who is a senior expert on energy and climate policy analysis. He works as a project manager in global energy forecasting team, using the POLS model and future in-house models for scenario building and analysis. And with that brief introduction, I'm very pleased to welcome our expert today, Dr. Sorel, to the webinar. Sorel?
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thanks, NREL, for the invitation to present you today our recent results on the implication of national determined contributions, that after I would call NDCs, and the role of carbon pricing for the energy sectors in Asia and in Pacific countries. Today's presentation is organized in 3 parts. First, I will introduce you the technical background and key figures explaining why we chose to focus our attention on Asian countries. Second, I will describe this particular study framework. Then, in the last part, I will present you the results for the different study cases. The technical background on which the study has been realized relies on the use of energy scenarios projections. The quantitative projections have been produced with the prospective outlook of long-term energy system models called POLS. It is a peer-reviewed global energy model that calculates full energy balances year by year for the energy supply and demand. It covers 66 countries and regions around the world with detailed sectoral and technological descriptions. The model inputs are shown by the orange boxes on the left, and the model descriptions is in the blue box. The model outputs are the international energy prices, energy consumptions and productions, as well as the greenhouse gas emissions that is shown in the gray box on the right. To build scenario with POLS, we make alternative assumptions for key drivers, like the resources, climate and energy policies, or available technological options. We also make macroeconomic assumptions on population and GDP growth. The scenario simulation allows us to explore different pathways for the energy markets. We usually run POLS to 2030 or 2040 or even 2050. As said in the previous slide, for each year, the model returns us detailed information on the energy supply and demand by country, sectors, and fuels, as well as greenhouse gas emissions. From our annual scenarios exercise called Inner Future Scenarios, we built 3 detailed scenarios representing different potential future energy developments. Inner brown scenario has no climate constraints. Inner blue scenarios is scenarios where countries' NDCs are achieved. And the inner green scenario is a 2-degree compatible scenario satisfying the IPCC recommendations, where the NDC are periodically reviewed and the ambition increased. These 3 figures show the population and GDP growth for the Asian countries, and on the right, the resulting energy demand for the region. Colored areas correspond to the inner blue scenarios, which is the NDC scenario. Strong economic growth leads to a doubling of the Asian energy consumptions, which drives the global energy demand. Asian countries will drive the global energy demand in the following decades. About 74% of the demand growth between 2015 and 2040 will come from Asia. However, the Asian primary energy mix will still be dominated by fossil fuels, and especially coal. In the power sector, the share of fossil fuel inputs should decrease from 84% to 66% between 2015 to 2040. Considering these key figures, NDC's ambition of Asian countries will be essential to achieve Paris Agreement mitigation goal. For this study, we look at the Asian countries in details, considering POLS geographical coverage. We gathered these countries into 4 regions: China, Japan, South Korea, representing the Northeast Asia; Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, and the rest of Asia, representing the Southeast Asia; Australia and New Zealand for the Pacific, India for the South Asia. We did not consider in this study the rest of South Asia region. For all Asian countries, greenhouse gas emissions are expected to increase in the baseline scenario by 2030 compared to 2010 levels, except for Japan. Asian countries' emissions are planned to increase twice faster in Asia than global emissions, with about 60% increase in 2030 compared to 2010 levels. Emissions of the region will reach about 24 gigatons of CO2 equivalent for the energy-related sectors, and will account for half of the world energy-related emissions, gaining 10% point compared to 2010 global share. With the first realized quantitative and qualitative analysis of the studied country and regions NDCs. As NDCs are very heterogeneous, we had to uniform the information collected from the different official documents like NDCs, UNFCCC documents, or national plans. The table shows the different NDCs categories. China, Malaysia, and India having a GDP intensity-based target. South Korea, Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam have a target compared to a business as usual scenario. As most of the NDC targets are economic-wide, we have to extract from official sources or to estimate the contribution of the energy-related sectors into the national NDC mitigation target. The mitigation efforts of energy sectors vary significantly between countries. However, it is difficult at this stage to evaluate the NDC level of ambitions, since we need to understand what this mitigation target means, considering the energy system development on one side and taking into account the national circumstances. Reaching countries' NDC mitigation target for energy-related sectors by 2030 would represent for the Asian aggregate region a reduction of 1.5 gigatons of CO2 equivalent compared to the baseline projection, which is equivalent to 6.5% of the baseline emissions by 2030 or 10% of 2000 emissions for the region. This graph shows the greenhouse gas energy-related emissions for different countries. 2010 level are represented by the light blue line, and 2030 levels are shown with bars, in blue for the baseline in 2030, and in orange for the NDC mitigation target in 2030. For some NDCs defined compared to business as usual scenarios, the assumption we made in a post-model scenario results in an important gap between the national business as usual and post-baseline emissions for only two countries, which are Indonesia and Vietnam. For these countries, the NDC mitigation target on the energy-related sectors must thus not be constraining. From the top graph, these two graphs, the difference between the light blue line and the blue bar allow us to observe the emission intensity evolution per GDP on the left and per capita on the right between 2010 and 2030. We see that most of the countries reduce their emission intensity per GDP compared to 2010 levels, except for Vietnam and for India. Between 2010 and 2030, emissions of China, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, and India have grown faster than their population. The difference between the blue and the orange bars provides an information about the NDC mitigation effort. New Zealand, South Korea, and Australia have the most ambitious emission intensity reduction per GDP and per capita in their pledges by 2030 compared to the baseline. This first analysis of Asian countries' NDC mitigation target for the energy-related sector provides already interesting information. However, we only look at the difference between the baseline and the NDC target in 2030. The policy framework that the country will implement to achieve the target will have a considerable impact on the sectorial contribution in the national mitigation effort, and of course, on the resulting costs at sectorial and national levels. This is what we intended to do with these case studies using our evaluate tool. In these few slides, I will briefly describe the methodology used for this case study. To quantify the marginal costs and the total abatement cost of emission reductions, we use marginal abatement cost curves produced by the Paul's models as a result of a sensitivity analysis on carbon value. The carbon value, what we call carbon value in our model, is modeled as a shadow carbon price applied to countries and sectors. Paul's produces marginal abatement cost curves for any target year, so for projected year, covering 6 greenhouse gas emissions, 20 emitting sectors, and 66 countries and regions. The illustration on the right represents the marginal abatement cost curve, where the emission reduction on the horizontal axis and the carbon value on the vertical one. When the carbon value is increasing, the emission reduction increases. A defined reduction target is achieved at a certain marginal abatement cost, and the total abatement cost is calculated from the area under the curve. To extract information and analysis from the large set of marginal abatement cost curves generated by Pauls, we have developed a tool called Evaluate. Since 2015, the World Bank has also been financially supported the recent development of the tool, and they used it for internal projects. The tool contains marginal abatement cost curves for all sectors and countries, covering all energy-related greenhouse gas emissions. And for this study, the marginal abatement cost curve target year has been defined to be 2030, in line with the country's NDC target year. The figures in the middle give you some screenshots illustration of the Evaluate tool. Evaluate enables to assess mitigation efforts like the NDC in this case study, and also the impact of carbon pricing instruments in terms of economic efforts. We can address the question of what are the estimated national costs associated to the NDC, and what are the sectoral or national costs of climate change policies. We can simulate emission trading schemes, carbon taxes, regulations, and finance policies instrument at a national level, which is at national aggregated level, and also for each 13 individual sectors that are represented in Evaluate. You have the list of the sectors on the table on the right of the slide. Evaluate tool outputs are economic indicators like carbon intensity of GDP, marginal and total abatement costs, impact of introducing carbon tax and trading at national, regional, and global levels, and also physical indicators like emissions or emission per capita, or consolidate total global effort and gaps analysis. So for this case on Asian countries, we explored 3 different policy scenarios for countries to achieve their NDCs. The first scenario, called regulation, considers that each country will achieve the NDCs mitigation target alone. There is no international cooperation. Moreover, countries plan to use only sectoral regulation policies like standards, and we make the assumption that every sector reduces its emissions proportionally to its weight in the 2030 baseline emission, regardless of the marginal cost curve. So let's say if the target at the national level is 20% reduction, then each sector aims to reduce 20% of their emissions. The second scenario, called domestic ETS, still considers that there will be no international cooperation. However, countries will use sectoral flexibilities to achieve the national target at least cost. This is represented in our scenarios by introducing an emission trading scheme at domestic level, covering all energy-related sectors, to trade national emission permits together. And the third scenario, called international ETS, is going further by opening the country's climate actions to international cooperation, linking domestic ETS schemes over predefined regions. Sectors under a regional ETS will then be able to trade emission permits. These tables synthesize the 3 scenarios definitions for the different Asian countries. Scenario 1, where each country will achieve the NDC mitigation target alone with sectoral regulations. Scenario 2, where sectors are allowed to trade national emission allowance permits to achieve the lowest overall abandonment cost to meet the NDC mitigation target. And scenario 3, exploring impact of international ETS. We chose to limit the international cooperation here into 3 regional ETS markets: China, South Korea, Japan in the Northeast Asia ETS, Australia, New Zealand in Pacific ETS, and Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, and rest of Asia in Southeast Asia ETS. For today's presentation, due to time constraints, I will only present you the result for the Northeast Asia ETS in the scenario 3, highlighted in the blue in the table. So in this result sections, I will present you key results and findings scenario by scenario before concluding the presentation. In the regulation scenario, each country achieves domestically its NDC mitigation target by 2030. There is no gap between the country's pledge and the achievement of its national policy framework. Compared to their respective baseline by 2030, China emissions will reduce by about 400 million tons of CO2 equivalent, South Korea and the rest of Asia about 300 million tons of CO2 equivalent, India by 250 million tons of CO2 equivalent. These 4 countries, which accounts for 65% of the baseline emission in 2030, represent about 84% of total emission reduction in the NDC effort for the Asian region. In this scenario, country sectors reduce its emission proportionally to its weight in the 2030 baseline emission, regardless to its marginal cost curves. The heterogeneity of countries' mitigation efforts compared to their baseline emissions, as well as of cost of mitigation options between energy sectors, result in a wide range of average marginal abatement cost in 2030 between countries. New Zealand average marginal abatement cost will be the highest of the region, reaching about $690 per ton of CO2. South Korea will have the second highest average marginal abatement cost at $440 per ton of CO2 in 2030. On the opposite, average marginal abatement cost will remain low for other Asian countries like China and India, with a cost of $9 per ton of CO2 and $17 per ton of CO2 respectively. This is due to the large country emission scale and an important and cheap mitigation options in these country sectors. In this map, we show Vietnam and Indonesia, just to recall that in this case study, our baseline assumption result in non-constraining NDCs mitigation target for these 2 countries for the energy-related sectors, which explain why the average marginal abatement cost is null for these 2 countries. The cumulated total abatement cost by 2030, which is cumulated cost of abatement from today, 2015 to, it was 2015 in our scenario, to 2030, will reach about 1% of the Asian region GDP over the period. South Korea will have the highest cumulated total abatement cost for far, with about 450 billion of US dollar, followed by the rest of Asia, Australia and New Zealand, due to the high differences of marginal abatement cost over the countries. If we look closer at the annual relative total cost in 2030, at the year 2030, per GDP or per capita, this is what is shown in the table, we find that in scenario 1, New Zealand and South Korea NDC mitigation target will be very costly. The annual total cost in 2030 could reach 4% and 2% of their GDP respectively. And if we look at per capita for the population to handle the cost of climate action to achieve the NDC, it could be higher than $1,000 per capita. These results mean that New Zealand and South Korea NDC mitigation target by 2030 is very ambitious. Moreover, it will be achievable at a very high cost if this country aims to achieve the target only domestically without international cooperation, asking sectors to reduce their emission respectively to their weighted contribution in countries' emission. On the opposite, cumulated total abatement cost by 2030 stay low for Malaysia, Japan, Thailand, China, and India. In 2030, annual total cost per GDP will even remain under or around 0.01% of the GDP for China, Malaysia, and India, with a cost per capita of $1 for China and India and $5 for Malaysia. Without taking into consideration the challenge of scale, the energy security or stability of the economic growth, scenario 1 shows that NDC mitigation target for these energy sectors would be by far less costly for these countries than for South Korea and New Zealand. These slides allow to quickly compare the distributions of the different indicators between the Asian countries. For example, China and India represent the major part of Asian emission by 2030 in the baseline, 57% and 22% respectively. The NDC mitigation contribution in the Asian emission reduction by 2030 are also significant, but lose dominance compared to the other Asian countries. However, in the regulation scenario, the cumulative total abandonment cost to achieve the NDC will be one of the lowest compared to the other Asian countries, with only 1.9% and 2.1% of the cumulative total abandonment cost for the entire region. On the opposite, South Korea accounts for 3.6% of the 2030 baseline emissions, but has targeted to reduce about 20% of the regional emission reduction target. But the cost of this reduction for South Korea accounts for 61% of the regional total cost. In addition to the ambition of countries' NDC mitigation efforts compared to their baseline emission, the policy framework by regulation asking each sector to reduce their emission proportionally to their weighted contribution in national emissions will penalize some sectors due to their high cost for reducing emissions. This slide shows the sectoral emission reduction for the Asian region, blue bar on the left graph, the respective sectorial average marginal abandonment cost in the orange dot on the same graph. And on the middle, the graph is showing the cumulated total sectorial abandonment cost on the, by share, but not by share, but by billion of US dollars, which is the total cost cumulated from 2015 to 2030. The table on the right highlights the shares of emission reduction and of total cost, and for the road, transport, steel, and power sectors. In this scenario, we see that despite the fact that the power sectors will reduce the biggest amount of emission, with 37% of total emission reductions, it will only support 15% of the cumulative total abandonment cost. However, for transport sectors, the transport sectors will represent 9.7% of emission reductions, but it will handle the highest cost, reaching almost half of the region cumulative abandonment cost. These results show that countries should carefully distribute the national mitigation effort to its sectors. It could be done by sectoral policies, or to find what could be the contribution of each sector at the least cost, we could simulate the impact of a national ETS covering all energy-related sectors. It's what we have decided to do in our second scenario, to implement an ETS for the oil sector that will simulate and reach the equilibrium of the least cost for the country to reach NDC. The scenario 2 results in the least cost distribution for countries' sectoral contribution to achieve the national NDC mitigation target for the energy sectors. Each country reaches the NDC target by 2030 without the years of international cooperation. This results in the same emission reduction achieved as in the regulation scenarios for each country. Implementing domestic ETS in each country would help to reduce the cumulative total abandonment cost for the whole region by 45%, from $750 billion in scenario 1 to $420 billion in scenario 2, cumulated over the period 2015 to 2030. Cumulative total cost for the rest of Asia, Malaysia, India, Thailand, and Japan decreased by more than 60%. South Korea total cost decreases proportionally less than the other countries, but the absolute cost reduction between scenario 1 and 2 is huge, saving about $163 billion, which represents almost half of the region's total cost reduction. Domestic ETS will minimize countries' total abandonment cost to reach the NDC mitigation target. This results in a unique national marginal abandonment cost that is lower than the average marginal abandonment cost obtained in scenario 1. Reductions are different between countries depending to the absolute amount of emission to reduce and also mitigation potential of the energy sectors. New Zealand and South Korea have their marginal abandonment cost reducing by about $100 a ton of CO2, but still remain high. China, Malaysia, and India still enjoy the lowest marginal abandonment cost, reaching even a cost less than $10 a ton of CO2 in 2030. To better understand what is happening at the national level, we propose here to have a focus on China and South Korea in the next two slides. Similarly, same analysis have been done for the other countries of the study, but you can probably exchange on that later in other presentations. China reduction target brings its emission to about 12,600 million tons of CO2 by 2030, representing a reduction of 3% compared to the baseline, but representing an increase of 50% compared to 2010 levels. Total amount of reduction to achieve the NDC is about 427 million tons of CO2. The left side graph shows abandonment cost in blue bar and trade cost in orange bar by sector for the regulation scenario on the left of the graph and for the domestic ETS scenario on the right. A domestic ETS in China reduces the total cost by 39% compared to the regulation scenario. And due to cheap with large potential of emission reduction in the power sector, almost all of the other sectors in China will be net buyer of emission permits, mainly issued by the power sector. We clearly see the total abandonment cost in blue bar of transport sector, chemical and mineral product sectors strongly reducing. Net import of permit in orange bar are significant in these sectors, but due to a lower marginal abandonment cost reduction on this national market, the net cost for this sector strongly reduced compared to the scenario 1. Even for the power sector, which sees its abandonment cost increasing due to the increasing of emission reduction in these sectors to sell on the national market, and the price going to $5 a ton of CO2, the power sector sees its total abandonment cost decreasing. The right graph shows how evolves the marginal abandonment cost by sectors between scenario 1 and scenario 2. So in scenario 1, we have a regulation, sectorial regulation to achieve the NDC, so different marginal abandonment costs by sectors. And we see here the transport sectors as the chemical sectors ending with a high marginal abandonment costs due to fast increasing marginal abandonment cost curves, making each additional emission reduction more expensive than other sectors. And with the national ETS market, they all stabilized to the optimal marginal abandonment cost, which is here to $5 a ton of CO2. A domestic ETS in China would thus be beneficial for all sectors in terms of total abandonment cost. The poor sectors will account for 96% of traded emissions. With a very low marginal abandonment cost compared to the region, China shows interesting potential for linking with other countries and to be a net seller of emission permits at low prices. For South Korea reduction target, this South Korea emissions will be by 2030 about 512 million tons of CO2, which represents a reduction of 37% compared to the country's baseline, and a reduction of 26% compared to 2010 levels. Total amount of emission reduction to reduce in its NDC compared to its baseline is about 309 million tons of CO2. Domestic ETS in South Korea reduces the total cost by 36% compared to the scenario 1. As for China, due to cheap and larger potential of emission reduction in the power sector, most of the cost gains and emission reduction will be done by this sector. Similarly, we clearly see that total abandonment cost in the blue bar for road transport strongly reduce. Net import of permits in orange bar becomes a major cost for the transport sectors. This means that with the domestic ETS, the transport sector will have an economic incentive to purchase permits on the market instead of to invest for low carbon technology. Even with the domestic ETS, the marginal abandonment cost in South Korea will remain very high compared to the other Asian countries. South Korea shows then an interesting potential for linking with other countries to reduce its cost for achieving its NDCs. For this last scenario, we explored the impact of international cooperation for achieving globally all countries' NDC mitigation targets. The scenario 3 is simulating 3 potential future regional ETS in Asia. So it's potential because it's not certain at this point. The Northeast Asia ETS covers about 15 gigatons of CO2 by 2030 and representing 60% of Asian emissions. The Southeast Asia ETS covers 3.3 gigatons of CO2 and the Pacific ETS covers just 2% of Asian emissions. I will only present in the following slide the result for Northeast Asia ETS, but similar analyses have been done for the other regional ETS. We represent on this map the annual traded emission permits in 2030 between the 3 countries. Blue arrows is showing the direction of the trades. The yellow arrow show in return the annual financial flows between countries to purchase these permits. To achieve countries' NDC mitigation target, the Northeast Asia region should reduce about 780 million tons of CO2 globally. About 330 million tons of CO2 has been traded, which represent 40% of the emission reduction objective. This international flexibility allows to drastically reduce the cumulated total abandonment cost by more than 90% compared to scenario 1 and scenario 2. This is what is shown in the bottom right figures, comparing the 3 scenarios with the cumulated total cost, which is abandonment plus trade, from 2015 to 2030. And we see that the one who gains most are South Korea. The figure shows the domestic emission reduction and the net imports by countries for domestic ETS scenario on the left and for the international cooperation scenario on the right. In both scenarios, NDC mitigation targets are achieved for all countries. The country's NDCs compliance is shown on the figure by the light blue line. We see that for both scenarios is the same at the end. So each country are compliant with their NDCs target. In scenario 2, NDCs are achieved only with domestic action, but in scenario 3, countries are relying on international offset of emission permits for their NDC compliance. Country sectors with high marginal abandonment cost curves will have incentives to purchase emission permits from countries' sectors with lower marginal abandonment cost curves. This process will result in an optimal marginal price, minimizing the total abandonment cost for the region ETS, the whole region ETS. At this optimal marginal abandonment cost, South Korea will mainly rely on imports to achieve its NDC. 287 million tons of CO2 is imported in 2030, which account about 93% of its compliance in this year. Only 22 million tons of CO2 are reduced domestically in 2030. Japan would rely about half on its import and half on domestic emission reduction. China reduces 312 million tons of CO2 more than its NDC mitigation target for the international trade. The country domestic emission reduction reached a total of 739 million tons of CO2 in 2030, representing 95% of the regional emission reduction target. We've shown that the regional ETS allows to drastically reduce the cumulative total cost by 2030 over the region. The figure here shows the cumulative total abandonment cost and the cumulative total trade cost by countries comparing scenarios 2 with scenario 3. South Korea has the biggest cost reduction with 93%. China and Japan will also gain from the regional cooperation market, reducing their respective total cost by 53% and 33%. Scenario 3 will bring the annual total cost per unit of GDP for South Korea within a reasonable range. This is what is shown in the table. So from 1.4% to 0.1. This low regional marginal abandonment cost will find the equilibrium at $9 a ton of CO2, which is shown in the middle table. This low price might increase the risk of jeopardizing the environmental integrity of the NDC mitigation goal. Moreover, South Korea will be strongly relying on permits imports, requiring high annual financial flows from its country to China. This dependency will also penalize South Korea to invest domestically to engage to its low carbon transition. To conclude this presentation, I will synthesize the key learnings from these three scenarios. In the regulation scenario, if NDC mitigation target for energy-related sectors aim to be achieved with an equal distribution of emission reduction efforts by sector, it would result in these 2 points. High emission reduction costs with an average of 1% of country's GDP from 2015 to 2030, and a considerable disparities of costs between countries due to diverse mitigation effort ambitions, and substantial disparities of costs distribution between sectors and countries. Big disparities of burden sharing between sectors due to the fact that under regulation policies, sectors contribute to reduction in proportion of their emissions, and that independently to their marginal abandonment cost. So sectorial flexibility, like a domestic ETS, for example, will help to reduce total cost and disparities between abandonment costs of sectors. With domestic ETS that aims to bring flexibility between sectors' mitigation efforts, we found that cumulated total cost from 2015 to 2030 decreases by 45% for the same amount of emission reductions compared to the regulation scenario. With $163 billion saved compared to scenario 1, South Korea cost reduction account for 47% of Asian regional total cost reduction in scenario 2. ETS equalizes marginal abandonment costs between sectors and then decrease total cost discrepancies between sectors. Resulting mitigation effort by sectors are thus cost effective. But we found that marginal abandonment cost of New Zealand and South Korea still remain very high, even with an economic-wide ETS on energy sectors, when China, Malaysia, and India have extremely low marginal abandonment costs. So this will encourage countries to use international cooperation for their compliance, and this could be done by regional ETS linking, for example, as what we studied in scenario 3. The international cooperation scenario shows that international cooperation allows to drastically reduce total cost for the regions, but also for each country. Cumulated total cost for China, Japan, and South Korea reduces by 91% compared to the domestic ETS scenario. Two factors explain this drastic cost reduction. First, the marginal abandonment cost of China, and particularly those of its power sector, are very low. 59% of market emission reduction are done by the Chinese power sector. Second, very high marginal abandonment costs of South Korea incent the country to import almost all of its emission reductions, and thus to reduce drastically and radically its total cost. South Korea accounts for 96% of total cost reduction of the Northeast Asia region. Nevertheless, trade leads low domestic emission reduction for Japan and South Korea. This situation could have the following negative effects that are very serious and should be addressed. First, a dependency toward an international carbon prices. Second, both countries can be stuck into technological lock-in and heavy intensive carbon intensive locking if there are no incentive to reduce emission domestically. And furthermore, letting markets working with no constraint could incent countries to lower their environmental ambitions. Solutions to tackle these issues could be through the definition of ETS market rules by setting trading caps, for example, like offset limits in million tons of CO2 or in percent of emission reduction, or by adding discount rate between the countries' permits. In this context, we have used Evaluate for the World Bank project to assess the impact of these market rules to link, in the study case, to link ETS in China, South Korea, and Mexico. So I would like to thank you all for your attention. I hope I've not been too long, and I will be pleased to answer to your questions. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to Dr. Sorel for that outstanding presentation. We're going to shift to the Q&A discussion. I just want to remind our attendees to please submit the questions using the question pane at any time. We also will keep up several links on the screen throughout for quick reference that point to where to find information about upcoming and previously held webinars and how to take advantage of our Ask an Expert program. We'll use the remaining time to answer and discuss questions. The first question is, could you tell us, or I'm sorry, for this case study, you compare NDC ambitions to a baseline. Could you tell us more about it?
Yes. So to add the economic incentive of emission reductions, we have to define a baseline. And this baseline should represent the current state of the country's policy with the last information and the evolution of the energy sector's development. So for that, we use first data in a blue scenario, which is the NDC scenarios. And from these scenarios, we remove all the additional policies that is needed to achieve the NDCs to get this current and this baseline scenarios. So we remove from 2015 all additional policies that is needed in a blue scenarios to generate this baseline. So I will resume that the baseline is a current policy derived from the in a blue scenario in the future.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Our next question is, the attendee would like to know, how can one compute the max for other countries or for other periods not covered in this presentation?
So max could be computed from energy models, and is something we've developed here with our pulse models, running a lot of sensitivities regarding to a carbon value, what we call carbon value, which is a shadow carbon price that is impacting the different sectors and different countries. So with our model, we have developed that, so we could generate that for 66 countries and regions, which is the one that is covered by Pulse. If I'm correct, there is more than 40 to 50 individual countries around the world, and then some regions. But what is important is the way, the process you generate this max, and the way you use it to extract the information. So the marginal abatement cost curve is a sensitivity analysis of the carbon value and the resulting emission reduction of the different energy sectors.
Very good, thank you so much. Our next question is, could you tell us more about why in your study Vietnam and Indonesia NDC targets are not ambitious?
Yes, thanks for the question. For this question, it is because, let's say, that the country that define targets compared to business as usual, that is their own business as usual. And there is two reasons that I can explain why our estimation and our baseline doesn't fit, and find that the baseline is more ambitious than the NDC target. The first reason is that first, we only cover energy-related sectors. So we have to understand what will be the contribution of the energy-related sectors into the national target. So for some countries, we have official plans, and for some countries, we don't know what the distribution between the non-CO2 agriculture and LUCF land use sectors, what are the contribution and what the contribution will be for the energy sector. So perhaps our estimation is different there for the contribution of energy sectors. Second point will be about for the baseline, we had to use some macroeconomic assumptions. So we use population growth projections from the United Nations, And we use the GDP projections from an economic center called CEPI. That is an economic center that produces this GDP projection for the different countries around the world. So on this point, the GDP forecast that is used and input on the model is very important and will strongly impact the energy demand forecast, and then the CO2 and GHG emissions of the country. So we found that our GDP forecast for Vietnam and Indonesia are less ambitious than the one that the countries define in their business as usual. So this also results on lower emission by 2030. So what is interesting there, it could be to work with the countries to assess different macroeconomic assumptions in our models and to see how it fits with their own business as usual.
Thank you so much. Our next question is, there appears to be a bit of a trade-off between trading to reduce MAC and the ability to individual countries to increase their NDC over time. How do you reconcile this with your policy recommendation for international ETS?
Yes, this is a very interesting question. And on this, we try to develop these case studies and this tool to support the policymakers in the way they will define policies to implement the NDCs. So there is first an important point is that what is the potential of emission reduction of my sectors and what are the costs associated to that? So you can use different hypotheses, and so you can test different configuration of energy policy per sectors to reach an acceptable cost for achieving the NDC. And you can also find that what are the cheapest options to increase the ambition of my NDCs. So of course, here we use a domestic ETS, which is a simple way to find the least cost solution of the contribution of the different sectors to achieve the national target. And of course, from that, policymakers could decide to say, okay, I want have a domestic ETS covering all sectors because it's quite impossible to implement and to define the institutional framework to do it. But it could be to use an ETS for power and industry sectors, which is very emissive in carbon intensive, and perhaps to consider what are the potential of reduction of the other sectors to set standards or regulations to bring them to contribute at a reasonable cost. And so this is something that the MAC curve can provide you. So to resume is that the way you use MACs will help you to define the contribution you want to set up for the different sectors and their contribution into the national NDCs. And from that, then you can see which sectors and what are the additional potential of emission reduction you can have and how you can increase the ambition of your own NDC over time. I hope I have been clear.
Yes. Thank you for answering that. Our next question, what did you mean by a low MAC for China in that case study? And is it good? Is it bad? And how, can you review again, how do you calculate the MAC?
Yeah, so the MAC is calculated as the sensitivity of shadow carbon price in the energy models. So MAC are top-down calculated from the different sectors using the model. So the process is similar of what has been shown in the slide is you run a multitude of scenarios, and every time you change the carbon value you use, and you see how your energy system evolve and how your emission evolve, and this helps you to drive your MACs. And can you recall me the beginning of the questions, please?
Yes, of course. The attendee would like to know, what did you mean by low MAC for China in that case study? Is it good? Is it bad? And how do you calculate the MAC? Okay,
so I answered the second part of the question. And so for the first part is that in China has huge potential of emission reduction and with lower cost of what could be in South Korea, for example. And so the models, if you use a marginal abatement cost about $10 a ton of CO2, you applied it on the poor sectors in Korea, and then you apply it on poor sectors in China, you will find that China will be able to reduce much more emissions with this marginal abatement cost than South Korea. So this explains why the marginal abatement cost curve for the poor sectors in China is lower on the rate of it could reduce more at the same marginal abatement cost than more emission than South Korea. So this doesn't mean it's bad or it's good. It just means that there is more potential of cheaper emission reduction in China than in other sectors. So it depends on the sectors, of course. It's not country-based; it's sectorial-based approach. So as you can see, for example, in China, even in China, the marginal abatement cost curve for transport sectors is much higher. So reducing emission in transport sectors, 1 unit of emission, so 1 million tons of CO2, will be more costly to reduce 1 million tons of CO2 in the poor sectors. So this is what we have. So it depends on the potential of emission reductions due to the energy structure of the countries in these sectors.
Thank you so much for following up with that. Our next question is, for monitoring countries' NDC implementation over time, it is important to be able to understand if defined policies would be sufficient to achieve the target by 2030. Would you be able to track this gap?
Yeah, this is a very interesting point that I little explained during the different questions, is that here in the studies, we only look at what the baseline is and what the NDC target is, and under 3 scenarios of policy frameworks that all achieve this target. But let's say that policymakers, when they want to define the policies they want to put in place to achieve a certain amount of emission reduction, so they mainly goes on sectorial approach with sectorial policies. And then what they could define that they would like to use for implementing the NDC target at sectorial level may not be sufficient to achieve the national NDC mitigation target. So for example, something that I play with the tools to try to understand with the European Union. So you have in European Union an NDC target, and you have EU ETS, an emission trading scheme covering certain sectors, and emission sharing regulations that cover other sectors. And then you can look at where you get and how you could increase the ambition and at what cost by playing with the different parameters of the policy design. And so using this max, you can support the policymakers to do that on a way that if they want to say, for example, in power sectors, I won't be able to do more than 10% emission reduction of power sectors. So you know what you can do in power sectors, but then what you could do in the other sectors. Perhaps when you aggregate all that, you don't achieve your NDC. So it's a way you can find space of improvement. So as I answer for the first question, you can find space for improvement of the NDC's ambition, but you can also find space for the improvement of your national sectorial policy framework to achieve your NDC. So both ways. The gap between the policy framework to achieve a certain amount of emission reduction by 2030 with the NDC mitigation target can also be studied using the MAC.
Great, thank you so much. I think in the final minutes, we have time for one more question. Are the presented scenarios realistic in the international context, knowing difficulties of existing ETS?
Yeah, of course, the scenarios try to look with a theoretical approach, very simple one first, with all regulation or all ETS is covering all energy sectors. And then you fully link the ETS schemes. So it's pretty theoretical and economically the best solution. But let's say that it won't be realistic in the future. So, but this gives you the most costly approach scenario and the least cost scenario. So you see that this big difference between the total cumulated abatement cost between the 3 scenarios that are very huge. But then say that having that in mind, you will be able to understand that there is limits. So if you want to go to international cooperation, you need to limit the way countries could be compliant for the NDCs by purchasing international credit. So then you can improve, and we can make a lot of analysis. So I think the best is to make this support with the policymakers for different governments that they want to understand what the opportunities to improve their policy design to reach the climate commitment, but also to reach it at a certain cost, and also to have domestically a policy design that helps the country to engage to the energy transition and low carbon sustainable development. So this study case was here to share these extreme scenarios, but everything remained to be done with very practical and specific cases.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that informative Q&A discussion, and thank you to the audience for those great questions. On the behalf of the Clean Energy Solutions Center, I'd like to extend a huge thank you to our expert speaker and to our attendees for participating in today's webinar. We very much appreciate your time and hope in return that you were able to take some valuable insights that you can take back to your ministries, departments, or organizations. We also invite you to inform your colleagues and those in your networks about the Solution Center resources and services, including our no-cost support through our Ask an Expert service. I invite you to check the Solution Center website if you'd like to view the slides and listen to the recording of today's presentation, as well as previously held webinars. Additionally, you'll find information on upcoming webinars and other training events. We also are now posting webinars recordings to the Clean Energy Solutions Center YouTube channel. Please allow about a week for the audio recording to be posted. Finally, I would like to kindly ask you to take a moment to complete a short survey that will appear when we conclude the webinar. Please enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you again at future Clean Energy Solutions Center events. This concludes our webinar.